Hello and welcome back to the show. Today I'm doing the first in a multi-part advanced guide on how to build and play Yummy. If you have no idea how Yummy works, I've already done an intro to video on Yummy that goes over the core gameplay loop, and I also have done a video explaining why Marshmallow is such a big deal and fixes one of the primary lose conditions of the deck, which is losing access to its field spell. So if you want to watch those videos first, feel free to do so. If you don't, then don't. This is going to be the most basic of my advanced guide series. The following videos will go over things like specific matchups and more particular mechanics and interactions you need to remember, but this video is going to talk more about the build. Why am I choosing to play these cards in Yummy, and which cards can you consider flex spots versus you absolutely have to play these cards? So unless you are choosing to play a particular niche build or other variant like Mitsurugi, which is kind of popular right now, you have to remember that after the ban list, if you lose access to something like Obedient Schooled going from 3 to 1 copies, it's not actually a big deal as long as you have very other high quality cards to play instead. So Marshmallow is a phenomenal card. Even if it did nothing, it would still be a Yummy name, which means you can go into the Link 1, which means you get access to the field spell, and that gives you basically everything. So just by being a Yummy name, this is strong, but also because it fixes the lose condition of the deck and gives you recycling access to cards like Surprise, it makes this much, much stronger. So much so that not only do I play 3 Marshmallow, but I also play 3 Surprise. I'll explain this in a moment. But I also want to say that I am playing the Piri Rice map, so this card is debatably not a good choice in a Droll meta. If you do not think you're going to be playing a Droll meta, then this is fine. However, there are other issues with playing with different cards instead of Piri Rice map, like the Sky Striker engine, which can also get hit by Droll, etc. So you have to accept certain trade-offs when you're going for maximum consistency and you're not playing other variants like the Mitsurugi cards, in which case you may not be playing a card like Piri Rice map because you have other types of starters for a different engine. But if you are going to be playing this deck, you should remember as a good benchmark what Ryzeal was like when it first came out. They had so many extraordinary starter extender cards, and that combination of cards that were both starters and extenders at the same time was what made Ryzeal good. If you also played during Snake Eyes format, you'll remember it was basically the same thing. There were so many different cards like Snake Eye Ash and Bonfire, or all the ways to get to it like Original Sinful Spoils and Black Witch, that made almost every card a starter and an extender. Because Yummy is built in a similar way where everything goes into the Link 1, which basically means everything is full combo, you should not take this for granted. You should play these cards at 3 while they're still at 3. Okay, so now I want to briefly touch on Surprise. So there are a few other cards that you could play in the 3rd Surprise slot, or some people only play 1, which I think is not correct. I think you could debate between 2 and 3, but one of the things to remember is that if you're playing something like a Prosperity is a very, very strong card, and I think that most people are playing cards like Prosperity and Yummy these days. Prosperity and Surprise are very, very similar in that they're both kind of like extenders. If you are stopped from playing after you started, Prosperity will usually give you some type of extender because it's going to hit one of your Yummy names, and then you're going to be able to continue playing from there. Now, Prosperity doesn't work very well with Piri Rice map, so keep that in mind. Whenever you are including your starters or extenders all together and thinking about what works very well, don't exclude things that are 3-ofs. Even if the Prosperity is only a 1-of, I feel like having access to Surprise, a card that is not once per turn, and you will very happily use in your turn and your opponent's turn, is never redundant. If you have drawn this and you want to search another one, that's totally fine. You can use the second one in your own turn to push and extend for more plays, a bigger board, and then in your opponent's turn, you still have access to this card, and if you've hard drawn it, then it's going to be potentially a secret. Your opponent will have to read or understand the way that you're playing to know that you've used Surprise because you've already hard drawn Surprise, etc., etc. So I think there are more advantages to playing a 3rd copy of Surprise rather than something like Pot of Prosperity, so I'm choosing to play this instead. Also remember that because this deck has kind of a weird win condition in boosting your main monster's attacks and then running over your opponent, sometimes Prosperity can stop you from OTKing, and that can sometimes cost you the game. Another thing that you should remember is that Star Ham, while some builds don't play this is kind of useful because since this is a synchro monster and the Yummy main deck monsters gain their effects from being brought back off of a synchro monster, you can actually use Star Ham to bring back the Marshmallow, and then the Marshmallow gets to bring back your field spell from Banish. So one of the lose conditions of the deck was losing your field spell to something like the Banish Zone, and that's not really a lose condition anymore. So I feel like Star Ham, even though some people are debating whether or not you should play it, it definitely warrants inclusion both for that reason and also because you can make Silvera in this deck, which has some extremely specific applications. I'll go over that in a moment, and I'll also show you a replay on that shortly. There are some other cards that you could consider playing. Usually when I build these deck profiles, the side deck is more of like a suggestion of cards that I chose not to play. But Dark Hole is a very, very strong card that you could consider as a core piece of your side deck if you're choosing to play Thrust, especially if you're going to be on 3 Thrust, either before or after siding. There are a few different reasons for doing this. So sometimes you'll notice that if you're playing something like the Mirror, you can lose because you're playing into like a cookie way and your monsters get booked before you can go into the Link 1 and you don't have any extenders. Or sometimes you're making a play with the Sky Striker engine and you're blocked because you have stuff in the main monster zone, or maybe your opponent is playing a weird build and they have like an Ibly or something. And in all of these cases, Dark Hole can clear your own field, and that can be useful depending on the build you're playing. In our particular build, because I'm not going for the Sky Striker stuff or whatever, the main utility is with Thrust, because if you're able to Dark Hole the board after you've baited some type of monster interaction, you can search for the Obedient Schooled and then you can still resolve the Obedient Schooled even though it's at 1. So the Dark Hole Thrust combination, I would say, is relatively strong and worth considering. One other thing that I wanted to mention is that Sangan is another card that is extremely strong. You can consider playing it in the main deck, but I think because of the existence of Piri Rice Map and Marshmallow, it's harder to justify it. However, because of Sangan's effect being able to search for hand traps, you can see if it's sent from the field of the graveyard, add a monster with 1500 or less attack. So there are cards like Drill and Lockbird, where if this could be potentially like a game-ending card, and if you search this, you're pretty sure you're going to win the duel. Like if you're playing against a White Forest player, for example, it doesn't matter that you can't use this turn. As long as you search with Sangan and you have this in your hand, even a mediocre board, if you've been playing into interactions, for example, is often going to lead to a win. And so I feel like Sangan could be worth considering also as like a side deck card, just because maybe you're in a format where a particular hand trap is extremely strong and you can get that off of Sangan. Obviously, if you need an extender instead, the Sangan can get one of those cards, and because all of the yummy monsters in the main deck besides Marshmallow do not activate in hand, you can still use them and summon them to the field because it's basically an inherent summon. It's not an activated effect, whereas Marshmallow is an activated effect. So just keep that in mind with Sangan. The main issue with this is that it takes up your side deck spots. So if you're trying to side for very particular decks, then you probably won't have space for both the Sangan and the search target and everything else that you wanted to play. So just keep that in mind. Okay, I think that may be everything before I wanted to go over a couple of replays. So let's talk about, I think the Silvera first, and I'll show you some stuff where you can chain block your Cupsy to guarantee that you have access to surprise out of turn. So the thing with Silvera is the start of this doesn't really matter. This is not a combo tutorial. I just want to show you that usually what's going to happen in many yummy games is you're going to have kind of like a messy board. And you're often going to encounter a scenario where you can't actually interact with the opponent because you are playing a pure version of yummy. So usually what happens in these types of scenarios is, let's say that your opponent, maybe they super poly you and you lose access to your Herald of the Arclight or something like that. And now they have a Mud Dragon. You're going to be in a very rough position because the yummy monsters typically target. So whether you're trying to use something like a Cookie or a Cookie Synchro, you can't do anything to their monsters if they have Mud Dragon on the field. Or there could be some other reason that you can't target it. They have some like weird monster that is very hard to out, like a Dragoon or something. And there's nothing that you can really do in pure yummy. So one of the easy workarounds, if you don't have access to something like the Mitsurugi engine, is instead to just make Silvera. So there's not like one specific way to do this. You can do this in lots of different ways. Often you're going to climb into it using something like Star Ham, and you're bringing out like other synchro cards. This is not like a combo specifically. It doesn't actually matter how you do this. I'm just trying to show you that it's very, very easy to do this because Star Ham is 3, you bring something else out, and now you basically have enough levels to go into Silvera. So also remember that this card says, where is it? So once per chain during the main phase or your opponent's battle phase, quick effect, you can pay 100 life points immediately after this effect resolves. Synchro summon using monsters you control as material, including a yummy monster. So those of you who have played an older Yu-Gi-Oh! Will usually expect that these types of effects lock you into your own archetype, but this only requires that you have at least used as one of the materials a yummy monster. It doesn't actually care what you're going to make. So you can use this to quick synchro out of turn, even if you don't have something else on the field that allows you to do that. So now you can see that if your opponent had, like a Dragoon or a Mud Dragon or whatever, the Silvera would out that, and then you'd be able to continue playing with your yummy stuff, and then maybe, target their other cards that were susceptible to targeting. So the last thing that I want to show you is, in certain cases, either if you have the hand where you're able to do this, or if you feel like you really need surprise for some particular reason, then you can just chain block it. So instead of searching when you first summon the Cupsy, you can just summon the Cupsy and go straight into the Link 1. So you haven't used the Cupsy effect yet, so keep that in mind. It's now just in your graveyard. So now the Snatchy will summon the minion, and you can special summon another card from your hand. So basically, like the best way to do this is if you've already drawn an extender. And if you've already drawn an extender, you are saving the Yummy search for when you can chain block it. So we've gone Cupsy, which I think was summoned 1, Snatchy was summoned 2, Marshmallow is summoned 3, and now we can use the field spell, which is summoned 4, chain the link 1, and go into the Cupsy Yummy way. So now what's going to happen is that we're going to bring out the Cupsy Yummy off of the minion, and we will have brought out the Cupsy Yummy way off of the Snatchy, using also whatever our other extender was as material. So now we're going to start a new chain, and we get to choose which way we want the links to go. So obviously, if you've already drawn access to Surprise and you want to search double Yummy monsters, then you could put the Cupsy Yummy way as chain link 1. But in this case, we care more about the Surprise. And I would also say, like, generally speaking, especially if you've had one or multiple starters in hand, you're always going to prefer the Surprise over the double Cupsy Yummy way search, because often having more access to Yummy monsters doesn't actually increase your ceiling. It just allows you to play through more interactions. But if you vomit your entire hand onto the board preemptively without having to have played through interruptions, then you're usually just giving up your own card advantage and then possibly dying to something like a late nib or whatever else later on. So in this case, we're going to be chain blocking the Surprise, and now we have access to Surprise. Also, just remember as a good rule of thumb, guys, that in no deck should you ever focus all of your power into one zone. So if all of your power is going into the monster zone, you can lose to a single Dark Ruler, Droplet, etc. You always want to have other power in your spell and trap zone. You want to have other power in your hand, like with hand traps or searched hand traps, like the Droll off the Sangan, etc. And then you want to have other stuff in the graveyard that you can access with Yummy normally. You want to have your field spell, etc. So don't sleep on the Surprise. You always want access to Surprise. So it's very important. This is why I play 3 of them, and this is how you can also chain block it. So my final thoughts for this part 1 are that in terms of thinking about how to build Yummy in a meta-agnostic way, okay? Before you think about things like how much coverage this Ghost Spell have, you know, maybe this is really good against Draco Tail and other types of decks, so you really want to play the Ghost Spell. Before you get into thinking about that type of stuff, you need to remember what is the core? What is the core of the cards that you want to play for this deck to actually function? And I would argue that if you look at the top 20 cards here, actually top 21, including a Croaky, this is a solid core for a pure Yummy deck. Everything that comes after that, debatably, is to do with the meta call that you're making. If you look at the rest of the extra deck here, there aren't things that are really too surprising or controversial. Some people don't play this card. This is another way to, you know, protect your field spells and stuff like that. Some people don't play the Link Spider. I feel like if you're playing pure and you have the extra deck space, you might as well keep yourself additionally insulated against cards like Nib. You don't want to be caught looking foolish. And Almirage is kind of similar with, you know, like hand traps or whatever, just to have access to a Link 1. So there are generally some basic rules of thumb you should keep in mind. And with Yummy, I feel like if you play these first 21 cards, then whatever you do after that can't be that bad, but it probably should be all non-engine. The more flexible, the better. So, you know, cards like Thrust and Talents, if you think they're good, or cards like Call by the Grave, if you think they're good, then those can be really, really strong additions. But what I would advise against is adding in cards like Sangan at this point when you already have your starter extender cards spoken for and you don't actually need more push. You instead need to be more flexible on the dice roll. And in that case, you want roughly half of your entire deck to be hand traps. These are basically turn 0 cards. The original turn 0 cards, guys, were things like Imperm and Ash Blossom. Before Azuna and all these stuff, all these cards were turn 0. So these are cards that you want to give you flexibility when you lose the dice roll, and they're still good when you go first because they are hidden interactions in your hand. So don't sleep on that. Okay guys, if you like this, then please suggest what types of content you want me to cover for Yummy next, and I'm super receptive to feedback so I can adjust my future videos on that. Thanks for watching. If you want to join the Discord, link is in the description below. If you want to subscribe, then do. If you don't, then don't. Thanks for watching.